Hey everybody, in today's tutorial we're going to be diving into two patterns that often trip up beginner drummers. Now these patterns are really similar, so we'll be highlighting the similarities between the two, and I'll give you a couple of tips on how you can make sure that you're playing the right one, you're not getting confused between the two when you're working on these. Okay, so welcome. These two patterns are very similar to one another. Now, one of the cool things about playing drums, and one of the reasons that makes it really accessible for beginner drummers, is the similarity. So what I mean by that is we often learn a beat or groove as a foundational pattern. We get it down, and once we've got that down, we can modify that. We can tweak it and do variations on that original pattern. Now what that means is that we don't have to approach every new pattern that we learn as something brand new. We can use what we've already got and make a small modification to it. And what this does is it speeds up the process, and it gives you a big vocabulary of patterns very quickly. Now that's great because it makes it accessible, but there's a downside. The downside is that we often play patterns that are so similar that it's really easy to get confused when we're playing them. So you'll be practicing a pattern, you'll get the muscle memory for it, it'll sound great, and then we'll make a modification to it and your body will take you into the other pattern. Now these two that we're going to be looking at today, this is very common with these two particular patterns. So let me show you the first pattern. I'll just play it for you to start with. I'm going to stick the notation on screen so you can see where everything's placed in relation to the other notes. Okay, here we go. Alright, so that is pattern 1. Now pattern 2 is almost the same, but see if you can spot the difference and what's happening with this pattern. Okay. Alright, so that's the second pattern. So not sure whether you spotted it. If you did, don't hurt yourself giving yourself a pat on the back. This pattern, the second pattern, is almost the same. It's the placement of those two kicks. That's what's different on the second pattern. So in terms of highlighting these patterns, if we look at both of them next to each other, you'll see that the placement of the kicks on the first pattern isn't directly after the snare. So you've got the snare on the 2, then you've got a hi-hat on its own on the and of the 2, and then you've got kicks on the 3 and the and of the 3. So if you count in eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and as you're playing this, you'll notice that the kicks, as I say, don't come directly after the snare. On the second pattern though, the kicks do come directly after the snare. So you play the snare on the 2, you've got a kick on the and of the 2, and then a kick on the 3. And then a hi-hat after that before the next snare. So it is just the trick really with getting this is just to understand the placement of those in relation to the first snare drum you play, those kicks in relation to the first snare. So a good exercise for practicing this, if you're getting these mixed up when you're playing them, is to just break it out and play from snare to snare. So on the first pattern that would go like this. And just sit with that exercise for a bit, get used to it, and then the second one, we'll try that separately, and we'll do the same from the snare to the snare, but the kicks are going to go straight after the first snare. And then you've got the hi-hat on its own that's just before the second snare. That sounds like this. So you see how that fits together. So there, as I say, it's a simple, both patterns are fairly straightforward to play, but for some reason they are so often mixed up. I see this all the time when I'm teaching. In fact, it really is the majority of the time. When I'm working with somebody, they'll get the first pattern down, no problem. When we modify it to the second, they'll actually play the first one. And some folk don't even know that happened when they're playing it. They're not aware. They think they played the second one, but in fact they played the first one instead. So your body tends to default to the one that you're most comfortable with. And as I say, that's super common in drums. See this all the time. So by breaking out the bit that you are having the issue with, you've got a smaller amount to do, and you can really pay attention to the placement in relation to all the other notes of the kick to the hi-hat. So just before we finish up, it's a bit of a short lesson today with this, but it's, there's not that much to cover with it. I'm going to do a little play along. So if you're at your drums, grab your sticks, play along with me. We're going to run it 80 BPM. That's our goal speed on that. And what we're going to do, we're just going to alternate from one to the other. So we're going to loop this. We're going to play it 8 times through. And we're going to move from the first pattern to the second pattern, to the first, to the second, first, second, first, second. And then we'll be finished with that. All right, so if you're at your drums, grab your sticks, play along with me. Here we go. Okay, so I hope you got some value out of that. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and that way I can keep you informed of new stuff that's coming out. And thanks again, and I'll see you next time.